more than an hour to enter the classrooms.
Find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take.
Hey everybody, well, welcome to our Sessions podcast. This is our 5th episode. It's actually our final episode of this season of Sessions as we've been taking this journey along the conversation about a world gone mad. This is in partnership with the series we're doing at the Crossing in Las Vegas, and this is a 5-week series of podcasts that we're wrapping up today. If you missed any of the previous episodes, we'd encourage you to go back and be a part of it. But I'm excited about my guest today as I have Jeff with me and Treyvon with me, and we're going to be having a conversation again that pairs with our conversation on the weekend at the Crossing. If you missed it, go back and pick it up on our app or on our website. You can listen to the actual message, but we're gonna go a little deeper today and get some perspective as we look at it. And here's the thing: we're basing all this conversation on the New Testament. So if you're a follower of Christ, you know the New Testament was kind of pretty important for us, and this whole series is based on Peter's letter to some really early Christ followers. And what's interesting is here we are 2,000 years later, basically, and a lot of what he said to them has a lot to do with where we are today.
It's amazing how that works, isn't it?
It's amazing.
Oh, wow.
So if you're out there and you're like, yeah, the Bible, whatever, I get that. But it's pretty, like, come on, that's amazing. So today we're going to have a conversation, and I'm just going to listen to these guys because I have a feeling they're going to go. But we're going to have a conversation around 1 Peter. Really, it's based in 1 Peter chapter 5. So if that's something interesting to you, you can go back and look at it. But it's really as Peter wraps up his words to these Christ followers, talking about the idea of endurance and how do you just continue and all of that. And listen, guys, this is potentially like a cliche topic, right? Like we can sit here and go, "Don't quit," give it your all and all that. Right? You can sound like your high school basketball coach. So if you want to do that, we can. But I would rather hear a little bit more around from you guys, starting off just kind of going. When you think about endurance, right? When you think about the idea of like, I want to get to the end, right? What are the type of things, I'll start with you, Jeff, that motivate you towards enduring when it's a thing?
Well, I'm a sports guy, so when I think of endurance, I think of athletes.
Yes, we just
like
got done having the LeBron Steph Curry argument. Here we go.
20 years, man. Almost 20 years. You know what I'm saying? All these NBA games, all these playoff
beating
games.
Up his body, all this stuff.
Beating up his body, but yet he's still playing, which is amazing how he does that. But in all seriousness, when I think of endurance, when I think of longevity, I think a part of me just truthfully goes back to how do people do it? Because sometimes in any craft, any profession, I am just amazed when they can put their bodies through all of that. Just not even as an athlete, but even when you talk about construction workers, you're talking about CEOs or whatever it may be. It is a long journey to try and get to the end. And so I try to, I wouldn't say study, but I'll try to watch and see like what people are doing and whatnot. But because I'm trying to figure out what that means for me, because I don't know.
Yeah, and sometimes we, Treyvon, kind of highlight, endurance athletes and all those things, right? But there's a level of endurance that just the everyday person, right? That just showing up. Yeah. They could be parenting, they could be in their marriage, they could be in a job that maybe they love, but it's not anything that people are applauding, right? And they have to show a level of endurance. You're a young guy in your early 20s, right? So when you think about endurance, there's a long runway in front of you. Some of us, like myself, right? We're looking at a shorter one. Are you motivated at all by the idea of enduring, or is that even anything that you actually think about as you make decisions right now? Too soon?
I wouldn't say too soon. Motivated by it, no. But I think because of like the way I was raised and the like modeled behavior of my parents, endurance is something that I know I need to have. So I think questions I've been asking myself is like, what am I doing to better prepare myself to endure in those situations? And so again, it's like, I mean, it's corny as it sounds, like looking at athletes, looking at people who endure these like really crazy things, seeing what they do and like take from it and apply it to my own life.
Well, for me, maybe it's bad. I can't do quitters. Like when I say quitters, I mean like when things get hard, I can't. It just frustrates me when people, the first inclination is to tap out and they tap out. Sometimes the first inclination is to tap out and say like screw this, I'm out. Like it's no good. But it drives me nuts.
Why does it drive you so nuts?
Because I don't get it. I don't get that mentality.
Okay.
Because nothing good like comes that easy. Like it's just not. It takes a while.
I agree, but at some point we all do quit.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So to me,
but there's quitting well.
I get it. I think that
Or leading
there's.
well.
I'm not even sure I would include endurance and quitting in the same conversation, right? Because I think endurance is going through hard things. It's sustaining through those things, and then there's a moment when you move on to something else and begin that process.
I'm talking about the ability to endure when things just hit the fan, when life just like smacks you right in the face.
Because you would argue endurance produces something.
Yes.
And the Bible would as well.
Yes.
What? What?
Well, it's fruit, right?
Okay.
But after a while, it just produces, a number of different, your character, like
Sure.
the foundation that you're setting. When you learn to push through some of these like these monumental moments in your life, I think there's something that happens greater within not only in your spirit, but in your overall life that becomes a blessing.
Trayvon, there's stuff that people have to push through that are hard. And then there's stuff that you just have to push through to get to where you want to go, if you understand what I'm saying. Right? So like, in other words, like for you in your age, there's probably hard things and that's great. You should talk about them. But I think there's also that point of like, I'm not where I want to be, but I've got to endure the monotony even, right? To get, and there's a level of endurance that I think Peter would say is true. Talk about that a little bit for you.
Yeah, I think for me, that's been probably the past few years.
Okay.
As I've been like going through school and trying to figure out what I want to do, like what's my calling in life. And I think slowly but surely I've been coming to like a conclusion of what that actually looks like, and being like trying to come to terms with like this is going to be a long journey. I'm going to have to go through these really crappy seasons that will ultimately build up my character so that I can, once I hit that room, I'm equipped to be in there and to like, I guess, produce something. So yeah, I don't know. But again, I think it's something you have to learn though. I think like that's what I kept thinking about when you were talking, when it's like the whole idea of like people quitting and people just giving up and whatever. I think endurance is something that you have to like learn how to do because your natural inclination is to quit. Yeah. So it's like,
I think it builds. It builds on one another. Like if you can go through one thing in life, I've had a conversation with a young lady probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and she talked about her story. Had a lot of stuff going on, like mental health stuff. It was crazy. And I said, I don't think you're like you may believe this is not for good. You may believe this is like this whole thing stigma you live with the rest of your life. But look at where you've come from and look at what you've gone through. And now you don't think about this. You're 20-something years old, and what's about to happen is we're in a generation now where mental health is such a big crisis, big issue.
For sure.
Yet here you are, like you love Jesus, like he is it for you, and now you're gonna get a chance maybe to pour back into people and walk them through. Because again, for a lot of people in your age would have said that's just me and that's that and they move on. But it's like no, you've endured this for a reason. So I think God can use that. That's
what's interesting if you jump into 1 Peter and what his words are there. Again, I'd encourage you if you're listening to go there. One of the things I didn't recognize until today, looking at the passage, so I should read 1 Peter more, but I didn't recognize is the parallel that he draws between humility and endurance.
Okay.
Which I didn't expect to see. In other words, there's a subtlety that Peter says of like, as we are humble, we will be lifted up, right? So it's that he's saying there's a degree of humility that has to be present in us in order to experience the endurance that God has for us.
Yes.
I don't think I'd thought of it that way, but when you think about the people you know that did endure, there is a level of humility, right? Of like, I'm just going to keep going.
Yes.
I'm going to lean into it. That has to be present, right? Because pride will make us tap out.
100%.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Right?
We can't do it on our own. So it's like, okay, well, if I can't do it on my own, then clearly it's not meant to be.
Well, and sometimes what you have to endure actually demands humility, right? Because it's not pretty.
Yeah.
It's not exciting. Like some people are listening and maybe you're showing up at a job right now and you really want to tap out, right? And eventually you may need to, but right now it requires endurance, right? Or there's times where you go through a low season in a relationship and you've got to endure, right? Yeah. This isn't a marriage session. We'll do that, but we did that last week. But
random question. Yeah. What was your first job?
My very first job was wiping cars at Octopus Car Wash in Tucson, Arizona for $2.25 an hour.
Okay.
They'd come out of that chute and I'd wipe them down. I smelled like Windex when I went home.
Yes. Okay. That's my point. Like you started there.
Yes.
Now, how long ago was that?
Oh, stop it.
No, honestly,
no,
how
I
long
can't
ago was
talk
that?
about it.
You
It's
can.
embarrassing.
25, 20 years
Yeah,
ago?
40 years ago.
40 years ago. Okay, so think about like where you were then,
Yeah.
how dumb it may have sounded for you to make $2.25. When you say that aloud, it sounds ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
But what you went through probably is maybe as a teenager?
Yeah.
Okay, probably annoyed at times. I don't want to get up. I don't want to do this. And now you look at it and see, you can look back and say, there's got to be something about that working in that car wash that has prepped me for.
Yeah, you begin that process of understanding what it is to do something that's not the most exciting thing.
Yes,
right.
yes.
Which again, I don't want to be that guy,
Yes.
but I think we do have a tendency as humans. It's probably not even just our culture. I think it's probably been true all the time,
Yep.
right? Of like when you're asked to do something over and over again that's not necessarily that exciting, right? It can be pretty frustrating.
It'll drive you nuts.
And it can be a thing. I was thinking about endurance because I run, right? And
Yep.
everybody's like, please don't talk about that. But I can't help it only in thinking about when you said people quit.
Yep.
And I had never thought about this until like 5 minutes ago. So maybe this is
Okay.
irrelevant. But I think about when you run, they do talk about you have to train to endure, right? So you don't run quite as far as you're trying to
Yes.
run, but you get close enough. Jeff, you run a little
Yes.
bit, right? And so it's like you train enough that your body is used to what that feeling is going to be,
Yes.
right? To do that. And then, they always say there is a moment to quit, and that's when you've hurt yourself, right? When there's pain involved,
Yes.
and where you moving forward is going to cause some long-term damage, right? So I think endurance is an underappreciated trait, right? And we're not sitting here saying you just endure forever,
No, I'm not,
right?
yeah, I'm not trying to be
But I
insensitive.
think most
Yes.
people could probably endure a bit more.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yeah, but but it goes back to I think First Peter because he brings it back to Christ. The humility of understanding you cannot do this on your own.
Let's talk about it in the context of Christ followers. If you're listening and you would consider yourself one, great. If not, you somehow stumbled in here, you're like, what is this all about? But I think there is also that idea of like some of us from within the context of enduring in the faith. Let's talk about that a little bit, right? So we've talked about life and all those things, but there's also the idea of like, I'm gonna follow Christ, right? And I don't have all the answers. There's questions I have. What is it like? Again, Treyvon, asking you as a experienced 24-year-old, or whatever.
22.
22. Okay, his experience just went down. Same thing. But like when you think of, but in all seriousness, I mean, you have your experience, right? It's like, what is it that, as Peter would say, says, listen, you're going to endure in the faith, right? And what is it that we do that helps that to be more likely to be true?
I think it's by building your foundation. So like this has been something I've been thinking about a lot because like even my word for this year is like foundation because I know.
Why'd you choose that?
I've just moved out on my own. I'm becoming an adult. Like I graduated college, all these other things.
You look like an adult to me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But I think I'm just in this space where I realize like now that I'm out of the house and I'm my own man, like what am I building my life on? Because growing up, it's your family. So now I'm like trying to establish what my foundation is. And the best place for me to start and has been fruitful even just in this past month has been just getting in the word. So I think walking in your faith and being obedient to whatever God's called you to do ultimately helps you build up your endurance.
I love that. Again, I'm going to go back to running. Sorry.
Okay,
Jeff.
no, it's a great analogy.
But it is a good
fits,
analogy
it
because I
fits.
think about like it is exciting when you choose a distance, a marathon, and you finish, and then maybe there's even people there, and you get a medal and all that, right? But frankly, the ability to actually get to the finish line requires you to get up at 5 a.m. when no one cares and run the sidewalks of your neighborhood when everyone else is sleeping.
hot.
Honestly,
Yep,
literally,
especially in
or
Vegas,
it's freezing cold,
Yep.
right? I mean, there's just no way to get to that finish line without waking up on a Tuesday morning at 5:30 a.m. and putting in the 5 miles.
Yep.
It just is. There's no shortcut, right? And I think the analogy stands when it comes to faith as well. For me, being somebody who's followed Christ for 40, 50 years, right, of experience, and it's like it's not fun all the time, right? It's not great. There's times where I'm like, this is not what I want to continue to do, even not even pastorally, but just faith wise, right?
Yeah.
There was, what was it? Like Psalm 37 or 73. I remember reading this part where it talked about how the people who seem to not follow or not having some faith on foundation or whatever seem to always get it right. Seem to always have like this, like they seem great. Life is good. And I remember thinking about that sometimes, and I'm like, man, like this is annoying.
Right.
Like, what's the payoff for this? Like, I don't want to talk about heaven. I don't want like. What about the journey to heaven?
Sure.
Like, what is it? Because sometimes it's just flat out frustrating. But then to come back to, again, you're saying like you come back to the foundation. You come back to like, what are you
That's a
rooting
great
in?
word,
You know what I
Trayvon.
mean?
That's
So
a
it's
great
like,
word.
What do you do in that? Like, and that's for me how I can, like, we talk about like the faith and the endurance. What is true? Like, where was I at when I first became a Christian? I literally, every time I'm like panicking or having this moment, this crisis, like, oh gosh, I just go back to the very basics of my when I first met Jesus, and I go from there versus trying and reinvent this stuff.
And I think when we think about people that are out there that are attempting to endure in their faith, right? We have to be honest. There are things that will come against there. There's opposition, right? And there's also just the work we need to do. I mean, right? It's like sometimes we think about, man, God, protect me, God deliver me, all those things, and He will. But there is a degree of responsibility that we have to do that. Back to Trayvon's word, to build a foundation that's there, right?
It's not
So
just
that
a
we can
sign.
endure.
Like, God's just not gonna show you these things. And then one day you woke up and you had this dream or revelation. I think it's doing.
Yeah.
We also just are shortcutters, aren't we? Is that right?
Oh, 100%.
Right? Like,
100%.
let's shortcut.
Yeah.
Let's shortcut. I remember Rosie Perez, again, back to the marathon thing. But you guys won't remember this because probably before you were born, but there was a gal who literally won the Boston Marathon. But she only ran 3 or 4 miles and got on the subway, and somehow she pulled it off and jumped back in. And they literally for a day or two, she was the winner.
Oh, wow.
The whole thing, the medal, the whole Boston Marathon. But they couldn't figure it out. They had to go back to the tape back in those days, and she wasn't anywhere on the course. And so they finally figured it out that she had basically run like 6 miles total.
Is that
It's a real thing.
go to
Like, you
jail
can
for that?
Google it. I don't think she went to jail, actually. We did an episode on integrity in this series of podcasts. I don't think she did anything technically illegal. It was just like, wow, what are you doing? Right. but again, I think we shortcut, don't we? Right. And we think we can just shortcut. Man, I don't know. I'm old guy right here going, there just isn't a lot of shortcuts in life. And the sooner you reconcile that, the sooner you're going to lean into like where you want to be. And I think sometimes if people can just embrace where they are at the moment, where God's placed them, what are they experiencing on a daily basis, and how do they build foundation, to Trayvon's point, and how do they get better today?
This is the weirdest thing. Okay, I was watching Family Matters.
That is weird right there. That's all you have to say.
It's a great show, right? And the credits came on, and it's with they're playing the whole song. And I remember thinking back to when I was like 8 or 9 years old on a Friday watching TJF, thinking, man, I just want to be an adult. And I found myself laying in bed watching, and I was like, holy crap, look at all this time that's flown by, and I'm becoming nostalgic in that moment. And my point is, we try to rush things forward just to get to this next thing. And here I am, 30 years later, looking back at what once was, appreciative of what I was going through then, more so than trying to just, and I wish I would have understood that then at 9, 10 years old, and just lived in it. I think right now, sometimes it's just a matter of just living where we're at, enjoying it. It sucks sometimes, but sometimes there's a lot of joy in it and finding that.
Yeah, I think that's just such a hard thing to grasp.
Do you want to comment on Family Matters?
No, I don't want to comment.
You don't even know what that is.
You do know.
I know what Steve Urkel is. Come on, man.
No, it's
There you go.
Okay. Anyway,
The link to Family Matters will be in the show notes, so make sure you grab it.
It was a great episode.
but no, I think that's a hard thing to grasp in today's culture when we're just moving on to the next thing, like boom, 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 especially because of like social media and stuff. So I think it's also goes back to the shortcut thing too. Like we get that instant gratification, instant whatever on Instagram and stuff like that. So I'm seeing the fruit of whatever I'm putting out immediately, and I can change it if it's not like that. But life doesn't work that way. But I think we apply those things to life. I think that's where it gets complicated. So I think like we as Christians have to remove ourselves from that.
Trayvon, and you probably don't all the time very well, right? How do you 22 years old, not you, but how is a person 22 years, how in the world do you show patience? Like how does that even, or is it even necessary?
Yeah.
Like, is it just like, it's not going to happen, so I'm just going to, like,
You about to
is there,
expose me to?
yeah, is there any
no,
way
He
to,
knows
go
I
ahead.
struggle with patience is a hard
Okay,
thing.
cool.
Patience, I am very much of the generation that struggles with patience. I'm very aware of that. It's a constant battle. But again, I think being encouraged by people like Jeff, other elders, and just people around myself. I just think people around you to kind of like speak into that.
Yeah.
And then for me, again, it's been kind of going back to the Bible and getting into that
Love that.
foundation, just because again, patient. It's hard. I don't want to wait. I want it now. Is kind of like the mentality. So
and sometimes though, I think partly why God gives us or encourages us to be patient is because I think what we think we want, we probably don't really completely understand that,
100%.
right? So sometimes there's endurance that, like, I think about, like you said, you're an adult watching Family Matters, which we need to talk about offline.
No, it came on. It's on every night around like midnight or so.
Be better, okay?
Yeah, okay.
But
I told him, write that.
the whole
Don't
point is
say
like
that.
sometimes, like we think back as someone who's lived Treyvon's journey to a certain extent, right? And we think, man, I'm really glad that what I thought I was pursuing, I did not actually continue to pursue, right? That I endured, but it's like that patience that was required led me to other opportunities or led me in ways and paths that God had in mind, but I wouldn't have. I would have just kept pursuing this particular thing. I was reading a book, President Obama was talking about this idea of endurance a little bit, and I remember the conversation. And it's actually stuck with me to the point where I have to remind myself. Someone was talking to him about racial relationships, and they were saying, "Hey, man, like you're the first black president, and are you ever frustrated and all that?" And he said, "Of course I'm frustrated."
Yeah.
But he also said, one of the things that I have to remind myself is there is this pursuit of purity, and what he meant by that was like this is the goal. This is like the ideal that I would love to see. But he said I have to consistently celebrate progress. If I keep my eye on purity all the time, right? If I keep my eye on purity all the time, I'm going to get really frustrated. So he said, I have that, but he said, what I really always focus on is, are we making progress towards that so that I can endure all of what it takes? And man, when I read that just a few months ago, I thought, wow, that's helpful even in our spiritual journey to think about like, I want to be who God wants me to be, and right? But then sometimes it's like, today, can I be better today?
Yep.
Can I make steps in transformation? Can I allow God to speak to me in better ways today? And if I can do that and then pile that on, eventually I'm going to see something different. Sorry, I didn't mean to preach there, but I think that's bring some
With the
Obama.
word,
But I think that's important for those that are listening to really feel encouraged.
I'll second that. I got nothing to say about it.
Cool.
I can't follow it up.
So encourage somebody, though. We're going to wrap this up, and this is a series of So this is our last of this series. We hope to be back with more later on this year. But as you think about, I'll let both of you speak to this question. Like somebody's out there, and we're kind of joking around, Family Matters and all that, but they're like, "Man, I'm about done." Whatever that means, it could be really, done, or they're just like in a season of their life, maybe even just spiritually where they're done, or in a relationship they're done. Without knowing their circumstances, I'll let each of you speak to this. What kind of encouragement would you give them?
Let me go. You got to go. Go ahead. I got you. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
You're staring at me like.
No, I just like agreeing first. Anyway, I think I would pull from like personal experience to kind of just encourage this person to just kind of like go back to your foundation. If your foundation isn't built on what it needs to be built on, reshape that. Pastor Shane kind of talked about that in week 1 of this whole series. The idea of like, what is your hope in? I think that's a good place to start.
What are you leaning your hope on?
Exactly. So right. I think my encouragement is look at what you're placing your hope in. And then again, I would also prompt a question. Are you doing the work? It's great. Are you walking in your faith? Are you being obedient to what you're called to do? Because that'll ultimately help you build up that endurance. So I think keeping your eyes on the prize, but also doing the work.
Top that, Jeff.
I can't.
Come on. That was really good.
The best thing I can honestly
22-year-old, the mouth of babes.
He's got it.
Give me some Steve Urkel and let's get out of here.
I was going to do the voice, but I couldn't because it's too deep. Anyways, for me, and like going back to personal experience, is just, it's a cliche, but it's really just being patient.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, truthfully patient a day at a time. Because I have, I've learned this in counseling multiple times now, and I've learned it a lot in my marriage. I can get all the way from A to Z so quick. I mean, so quick, because my brain just explodes. Like I can see it. We're going to get there. We're going to go. But I don't realize that along the way, there's still the rest of the alphabet. There's still the rest of the things that have to be put in place. So what happens is I get very frustrated. And almost like, just annoyed by people in general because we're not getting to where we. They're a
barrier to what you're seeing.
Yes. So it frustrates me. But I think in general, when you talk about this idea of enduring, it's like, okay, celebrating along the way, looking at what the progress that's been made, but understanding this is going to be slow. And truthfully, the humility to say, this is not my timing. Like this is, if this is a vision I do believe is from God, and
great.
God is taking me here to this spot, then I got to go at His speed, at His pace, versus because if it's up to me, I would just go warp speed.
And those are great words. And Peter would echo those words, I think of the accident, we'll close off this series with this is, I always tell people when it comes to endurance and when you're at a breaking point or maybe you're even at a point where you're at a decisive moment, I always think about to your foundational point, Treyvon, when you don't know what to do what you know, right? And so it's the idea of like, if I'm confused, there are things I do know. And so until I have clarity, keep doing those things, right? Building the foundation. So if there's somebody out there like, man, I just want to give up. It's like, okay, you may not even know what you're enduring towards at the moment. Do what you know right now, right? Trust the things that you know. Trust the things that God's implanted in you, and trust that as those things, you continue to repeat those, that clarity will come that will provide hopefully the opportunity for you to endure and finish well, because we would hope we all. Hey, Treyvon, thank you. Jeff, thank you.
Appreciate it.
This has been a great series of podcasts. This is our Sessions podcast. This is, again, we want to remind you, this is accompanied a series of messages from the Crossing Las Vegas. And if you want to go on our app or our website, you can go back and see those messages in their entirety, even on our regular podcast channel. So we appreciate you joining us for this series of World Gone Mad sessions. And we hope that when the Sessions podcast season 2 comes back, that you'll be right alongside us. So appreciate it so much, and we hope you have a great week.